In 8 days, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. I'm trapped in a perpetual Groundhog Day, but it's more than a day. The world feels a little grislier with every reset. I've always known that some sort of higher power must be the architect of my eternal torture. What other explanation could there be? But I no longer simply know of that power. I've seen it. Let me rewind. I'm used to doing that after all. I don't know how many times I've relived the past 2 decades. Enough times to slowly go insane. I've done some crazy shit in a manic attempt to break free. I actually thought I could end the cycle by altering the course of the future. During the present iteration, I haven't really bothered. I'm tired. So, you're experiencing the natural course of events, I suppose. Let's just say there was an iteration in which I invested wisely, became a billionaire, and spent my riches on changing the landscape of the world. I even paid extraordinary amounts of money to scientists who promised they could uncover the secrets of the universe. I thought they could fix whatever had happened to me. The problem is that I don't think they ever truly believed my story. They didn't really try to understand how a time loop would work, so their research was half-hearted. Nobody has ever been able to save me. And, before anybody asks, death is not the answer. It just resets the loop. I find myself waking up on the morning of December 31st, 1999. I celebrate the commencement of a new millennium with my family, and we admire the fireworks. At this point, of course, I've probably lived for a millennium. The horror of waking up in my 13-year-old body with a 36-year-old mind never fades. Or maybe I'm 3,600 years old, eh? Who knows? I'm certainly not counting. Anyway, I always detest reliving those teenage years. I pretend to be a normal kid and blend in with my peers. A few months after the first reset, I managed to calm myself down and seize the opportunity to make better decisions. Maybe it's a second chance, I decided. I took care of my health. I married the same girl, but I was a better husband and managed to prevent the divorce. I spent more time with our kids. I was a better version of myself. As December 31st of 2022 approached for the second time, I thought I'd done what the universe wanted me to do. You can imagine my unbridled terror when the loop reset. And that's when the penny dropped. I'm stuck. Madness ensued. 4 resets later, I tried killing myself. That didn't work. I tried hundreds of times in hundreds of ways. No luck. So, I've given up and resigned myself to this hellish existence. During every fresh iteration, however, I do try something new. I have to attempt to save myself, right? This time, I've posted about my experience on Reddit. That's new. I'm reaching out for help. Maybe I haven't fully given up. I might say otherwise, but my actions speak louder than my words. I mean, I have to be honest. I've never gone completely wild. I've never completely ruined my life. I've stripped naked and run through the local park, but I've never, say, robbed a bank. I can't risk doing something life-destroying. What if the loop has ended? Every time I reach December of this year, I start to wonder that. It's what keeps me from entirely unhinging and doing something foolish. I don't want to endure this infinite torture. I guess I still believe that I can break free of the cycle. I believe in January 1st, 2023. I'm sure all of you will see it. Surely when that day arrives, I'll have discovered a way to move beyond the loop. Eventually, I have to make it to next year, right? What's the alternative? I can't seem to die after all. Well, that's what I used to believe. After a certain number of resets, I began to notice something disquieting. It started during one particular December of 2022. I noticed something watching me. It always happens during this final month. For instance, I might stroll down the road and catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision. On street corners, I've seen a man with eyes that have no pupils. That's not all. I've heard things that other people say they can't hear. There are shushing noises with no source. I wake up in the night bathing in a pool of sweat, assured that I've spotted glassy pinpricks in the darkness. Sometimes they rapidly vanish, as if the thing has closed its eyelids to avoid detection. Other times, the eyes linger, hovering in front of me. The thing seems to be getting bolder, and that haunts me. Last week, I was in an art gallery, and I saw a terrifying painting. My wife and friends said it was beautiful. They couldn't comprehend why I suddenly had a gaunt complexion. I suppose it would seem like an odd reaction. After all, the painting simply depicted an ordinary man. But I felt as if I'd taken a stroll through the uncanny valley. His eyes were dreadful. Something about him was marginally off. And for the briefest moment, the gallery light caught the painted eyes in such a way that the pupils disappeared. I found myself staring into the vacant eyes from various street corners in my darkened bedroom. They were boring into my skull. I whimpered in terror. The worst part is that I've been to the art exhibit before. On December 10th, 2022, my wife and friends always drag me there. That painting wasn't there in any of the previous iterations of this loop. In that exact spot, there had been a painting of Big Ben, proudly displaying 11 o'clock. And that's something which petrifies me. It means things are changing, and I don't think they're changing for the better. I have considered letting go. My fight is fading. Perhaps I should embrace the entity with open arms. Perhaps it has come to release me from this nightmare. It could offer a finite death and put an end to the loop. But what if it delivers a worse fate? Every time I see the glassy-eyed man, I feel my chest coil into a clove hitch. He isn't good. He isn't trying to save me. I need to figure out how to reach January 1st, 2023. In 6 days, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. I've posted the first part of this story twice, but I know what you're thinking. Why repost the exact same words? In part 1, you said you were trying something new. You said it was the first time you told your story on Reddit. Liar. I needed to do things exactly the same way. I'll explain that. For brevity, I devised a clearer reference system for each new iteration of this time loop. Obviously, there were thousands of iterations before these 3. I1 refers to the first iteration. I initially posted it on Reddit. I2 refers to the second iteration. Mistakes were made. I3 refers to the third iteration, my current iteration. Something happened during I1. I barely made it out of that iteration alive. Details will follow. But that's how I discovered I was on the right track. The glassy-eyed man is pursuing me more aggressively than ever. I think he has grown weary of lurking. This is what happened during I1 on December the 24th, 2022. Merry Christmas. The man on my doorstep was a frosty fellow, so I thought of him as a sombre snowman. He had not come to offer glad tidings or a tuneful carol. I knew that before he even opened his mouth. I quaked in horror, dreading what he might have to say. "Who are you?" I timidly queried. "Somebody who can help," he responded. "I saw your post." My breathing flattened. I rooted myself to the ground, too shaken by the menacing statement to muster any kind of reply. "Who is it, Jake?" my wife called. "The postman," I shouted. No matter how many lifetimes I live, I despise lying to Vanessa. But the truth is too complicated. There has only been one time that I ever explained my looping predicament to her. She didn't believe me. She thought I was mentally unwell. Since that iteration, I have always kept it a secret from her. "How did you find my address?" I eventually whispered. "Does that really matter?" he replied. "I had to see you. I travelled a long way. I think I can stop what's happening to you." "Not here," I blurted. "My family's inside." "Time is not on your side," he firmly told me. "I'm trapped in an endless loop, so I'd beg to differ," I facetiously quipped. "It's not endless," the stranger coldly replied. "You feel the thing with no eyes getting closer, don't you?" Before I could pry my trembling lips apart, Vanessa appeared behind me. "Hello," she exuberantly said. The man weakly smiled. "Merry Christmas. I was just telling your husband that I must have foolishly left some of his parcels at the office in town." "Right," I added. "In fact, I think I should come down to the delivery office." "What have I told you about ordering presents late, Jake?" Vanessa mumbled, rolling her eyes. "I know," I smiled. "Don't worry, I'll be quick." Away from Vanessa's prying ears, we decided to meet at the town hall, which was only around the corner. Still, the drive to our rendezvous point was unsettling. I followed the man's black sedan in my beaten-up family car. No matter which radio station I chose, however, I was horrified to find that the same song played. Stairway to Heaven. The once beautiful guitar passage now seemed to harbour a sinister secret. I turned off the radio, but silence didn't make the journey any easier. The disused roads of the festive season felt haunted. Trundling behind the mystery man's sedan, I stole glances at icy alleyways on either side of the road. Shivering, I kept expecting to see him. I was too petrified to breathe, fearing that the glassy-eyed man might find me if I were to gasp for even the smallest pocket of air. We parked on a quiet residential street and went for a stroll. The sun was descending on the nearby town hall, and the streets were starting to empty, but I was a little relieved to see at least some signs of life. Regardless, I knew that wouldn't keep the dark creature from me. "What makes time so special?" the man suddenly asked. I shrugged. "We all have it," the stranger answered. "Please, just tell me what—" I was interrupted by the jarring sound of nearby lampposts shattering. The night embraced us like a thin blanket. Shushing filled the air like a ghoulishly glacial wisp of wind. I have never been consumed by such existential terror, and this is coming from a man who has been alive for countless millennia. I've even welcomed death with open arms, but that moment, above all others, truly haunted me. There are things worse than death, after all. Glassy spheres emerged from the blackness, hovering at the other end of the pavement. As hauntingly garish eyeballs illuminated the void which engulfed it, a black shape moved towards us. "Find me after you reset," the internet stranger whispered. "Time is dwindling, but—" The man did not have the opportunity to finish his sentence. His face lost its colour. Those glassy pinpricks were suddenly occupying the stranger's eye sockets. My mystery visitor howled in agony, and his flesh started to incinerate. There was no fire, but you wouldn't know that from the sight and smell of the man's disintegrating flesh. Blackened, bloody strips of skin peeled from his skeleton. His wail was that of a dying animal, desperately crying for a saviour that it prayed would emerge from the darkness. Nothing came to save the man. Collapsing to his knees, his clothes shrivelling atop his melting flesh, the stranger's cries mutated into hoarse whispers. I saw his tongue wither in his open mouth. I think he tried to say something with his final breath, but all he could achieve was the most horrific moan. He was reduced to the blood-red meat beneath his skin. I suppose there were still gauntly eyes lodged in his skull. They weren't his eyes, though. Bereft of life, the man toppled to the ground. From his burnt corpse, a spectre ascended. Those soulless pinpricks materialized in the shadowy darkness, gazing into my soul. The glassy-eyed man did not speak. I, on the other hand, could not speak. Suddenly, there was pain, unconceivable pain. I tentatively peered down to see a black limb, flesh composed of night itself, piercing my left shoulder. Terrified beyond comprehension, I tried to bellow in pain, but my fragile body could scarcely manage a whimper. When I woke, I was in my 13-year-old body. Of course, death would have been too easy. The man was right. Time. We all have it. Some of us have all of it. Before I could fully process my surroundings, I realized that my body was in agony. Blood was soaking into the bedding from the wound on my left shoulder. My wound was still there. Immortality was no longer a foregone conclusion. The glassy-eyed man could end me. Following a hospital visit with my bewildered and traumatized parents, I resolved to change. I would no longer accept this existence. I might not survive my next encounter with the glassy-eyed man, and who knows where he might send me if he were to kill me. After all, there might be an eternal torture worse than my current one. I couldn't rid my mind of that petrifying thought. I spent years searching for the stranger who had knocked on my door. Unable to wait for the formation of the No Sleep subreddit in 2010, I decided to simply create it. I posted my experience on there. Nobody came to my house. In desperation, I posted on so many different websites, but I quickly realized my mistake. Surely I needed to repeat events in exactly the same way. I needed to submit the post on December 23rd, 2022. I did just that, but there was no house visit. Perhaps I had already made too many changes to the timeline. Fortunately, I also avoided the glassy-eyed man, but I found myself resetting to I3 on New Year's Eve 2022. I spent another 23 years waiting impatiently. Then, 2 days ago, I submitted the first part of the Reddit post. I worried that I might have worded it too differently to catch the eye of the internet stranger, but it worked. Today, he visited me. I ushered him into the living room and prayed that my wife wouldn't overhear us. I hurried the stranger through his persistent riddling. I wasn't going to let the glassy-eyed man consume him. What's the significance of New Year's Eve 1999, I asked. Do I need to go back and fix things? The stranger shook his head, and he offered, surprisingly, a succinct explanation. A time loop is a glitch in the universe, the man said. The entity is here to end the glitch that caused the loop, and he believes that the glitch is you. Something else is trapping you. Think, Jake, what happened in 1999? And that's when I remembered. My body tensed and my heart filled with dread. Some boys were bullying a kid from our neighbourhood, Pippa, a 10-year-old girl who never did anything to hurt anybody. The boys locked her in the old Hawthorne house, a derelict hellhole. I stood there telling myself I wasn't complicit in the crime. I just watched. Inaction is action, I suppose. Whilst the fireworks distracted everybody at midnight, I slipped back into the house to rescue her, but she wasn't there. I assumed she had escaped and gone home. Over the following week, however, missing posters popped up. Pippa was never found. Even more horrifyingly, neither were the other 3 boys who locked her in there. All 4 children vanished before the start of the new millennium. I told the stranger this story, and he nodded. There are things in this world that defy reason. I've seen them. That's why I came to you. Pippa needs help, he said. I think she and those boys are still in that house. I don't think the Hawthorne place abides by the rules of time. What do you mean? I asked, shuddering. The stranger paused. Based on things I've experienced, I'd say it's an 11 shrine, an unholy place that ensnares people at the turn of every new year. Such places exist outside of space and time. Pippa is the force that keeps resetting your timeline, he continued. If you free her and the boys, you might be saved. They would be returned to the moment of their disappearance in 1999. But that would be the original timeline, a parallel universe. When I returned to the house, I couldn't find the girl, I said. Why would it be any different if I were to revisit it? I told you, the stranger said. An 11 shrine exists beyond the construct of space and time, but it creates a bridge to our world between 11 p.m. and midnight on New Year's Eve. How did you learn these things? I asked, suspiciously, though I was admittedly a little late. I don't think you're ready for that tale, he said. And even if I were to tell you what happened to me, could I not still lie? You just have to trust me, Jake. All right, I conceded. How do I need to prepare for New Year's Eve? When the man explained that I'd have to venture into the Hawthorne house at 11 p.m, I trembled in horror. I've spent Christmas Eve watching my family with teary eyes. Can I avoid the flesh-searing limbs of the glassy-eyed man for 6 days? I keep seeing those lifeless eyeballs in the darkest crevices of my house. Even now, as I write, I could swear I just heard shushing from our wardrobe. Tonight, I will wake up in 1999 and relive the past 23 years. Have you ever squandered an opportunity to prevent something terrible from happening to somebody? Maybe you've been caught in a time loop too. I suppose you might not yet know. You could reset tomorrow. It could happen on New Year's Eve 2034. Who knows? Over the festive period, I couldn't stop thinking about New Year's Eve 1999. I remembered being terrified of those bullies, just like the little girl. If I had been courageous enough to intervene, I wouldn't have faced the karmic retribution of a time loop. I am still in I3, and, since my previous post, I was sure to make note of the internet stranger's contact details, lest the glassy-eyed man should, once again, reduce my new friend to a smouldering carcass. What's your name? I asked. Harold Langley, the man answered. Harold still wouldn't tell me how he knew about such corrupted things as 11 shrines and spiritual forces. He told me that I already had everything I needed. I knew to go back to the Hawthorne house between 11 p.m. and midnight on New Year's Eve. Any New Year's Eve would do, in fact. Well, I could simply wait to be reset to 1999. Then I could stop the boys from ever locking Pippa in the house, I suggested. Harold shook his head. Even if you were to return to the past and drag the children miles away from the Hawthorne house, the shrine would still entrap them at 11 p.m. on that fateful New Year's Eve, 1999. Remember, they're already there. The house exists outside of time. Much like your own loop, no matter where they might travel, their bodies would still reset to that house at 11 p.m. They can only be freed from within the 11 shrine. Sending me back to 1999 is a convoluted way of sending a message, I grumbled. She doesn't know what she's doing, Jake, Harold gently assured me. Pippa is calling for help from an ungodly realm, and that has incurred an abnormality in time. After a long discussion, I could no longer escape the fact that Harold knew far more about this topic than me. I'd spent millennia searching for an answer, and I finally had one. I just couldn't accept it. In truth, I simply didn't want to go anywhere near the Hawthorne house. It imbued me with unspeakable thoughts. Every time I walked past it, I felt evilness surge through me. And I know that every child in my neighbourhood felt the same way. The Hawthorns had died decades before our time, but we knew that something was deeply wrong with the building they'd left behind. The house felt like a living, unfeeling thing. It was crooked, out of place, ill-intentioned. New Year's Eve 2022. The Hawthorne house was exactly as I remembered it, though the neighbourhood was certainly much livelier. There were no missing posters, and the roads were littered with revellers, preparing for the new year that I had spent ceaseless centuries attempting to reach. 10:41 p.m. 19 minutes until I would reset, unless the glassy-eyed man finds and ends me. If Harold were correct, my only salvation would be to enter Hawthorne House. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the shrine would open. There's something much more frightening about seeing a haunted house in the real world. I've never minded eerie buildings in photographs or films, but the Hawthorne House is the most terrifying place I've ever visited. I gently walked from the moss-covered gate to the fatigued front door, which was painted a long faded blue. In the front yard there was an unlabelled stone cross, submerged in overgrown, withered grass blades. There were 3 stories to the neglected building. Dark chasms lay behind the glassy panes, and the attic had a misted-over window. I felt a piercing pang of horror in my chest at the sight of a black shape moving behind the glass. Other than a private property sign on the front gate, there was nothing to ward away intruders. There was no barricade across the rotting front door, and it was unlocked, so it creakily inched open with a light push. Perhaps the mere sight of the horrid place was enough to deter most people from trespassing. I wished that I could have the same luxury. As I entered the Hawthorne House, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and lit the dismal place with my torch, revealing a hallway that led onto a ginormous staircase. There was an open doorway on the left-hand side of the hallway, and it led onto the lounge. I strolled into the dusty, asbestos-riddled death trap. In the living area, there was a sofa which had been partially devoured by vermin, but I collapsed onto it and waited. 11 p.m. My heart stopped. I wasn't fading away. I was still in the present. No, this isn't the present, I reminded myself. The Hawthorne House exists outside of time. The whole thing still confused me. Nevertheless, my phone's lock screen displayed 2300, which was good enough for me. I wasn't resetting. That was the important thing. Before I could wrap my head around that, however, I noticed something. The walls were groaning. Chest undulating in terror, I leapt to my feet. The whining foundations of the house seemed to lament my presence. I took a look at the world outside of the mucky lounge windows. My dimly lit neighbourhood was rapidly vanishing from view. Within seconds, everything beyond the exterior of the house was black. The bridge to the physical realm was gone. Though time was a foreign concept in that shrine to evil, I still felt that it shouldn't be wasted. I had no idea what happened to the children, and I had no idea what was about to happen to me. I needed to find them. Then I could focus on finding a way to reopen the bridge and escape. I don't know how to exit an 11 shrine, Harold had quietly admitted to me. Time works differently in there. I think it only opens a bridge to our world when it wants to do so. So I suppose you have to give it something that it wants more than Pippa and those boys. Those words rung in my head. I found myself meandering in the living room of the lost house. There was a large frame above the fireplace. Using my phone light, I studied the unnerving canvas that loomed above me. It was a painting of the Hawthorne House in its bygone glory days. I did not recognise the 3 people standing in front of the house, but I assumed it had to be the Hawthorne family. The mother and father were prim and proper. They must have lived in the 1940s, judging by their fashion. But I wasn't really looking at them. I was looking at their boy. He was a skeletal thing. His flesh seemed to cling tightly to the outline of his skull. The indignant expression on his face was communicated through joyless eyes and thin lips. He had a complexion that was almost wholly white, and that, strangely, gave the jubilant expressions on his parents' faces a sinister undertone. Why were they so happy? Their son appeared half dead. Needless to say, the painting absolutely horrified me, but everything in that house horrified me. The swirling, nightmarish colours of the artwork felt like a fever dream. In the pristine oval window at the top of the painted house, there was movement. The paint was actually moving. Unlike the movement I'd seen in the real-life oval window, these painted shapes were crystal clear. Pippa, and the three bullies. Their mouths were agape, much like the man in the scream, and they were huddling together, ferociously banging their tiny fists on the window. As if that weren't horrifying enough, there was more movement in the picture. The painted mother turned around and started strolling along the path, heading towards the house. The sun was decaying before my very eyes. His painted form seemed to be crumbling. Yet the father smiled, and the mother continued walking towards the house. She reached the front door. Thumping followed. And I do not simply mean that I saw the painted mother thump the painted door. There was a thumping sound on the real-life door, which was in the hallway behind me. A blood-curdling screech followed. It was a woman, I suppose, but her voice no longer sounded human. There was a guttural, distorted quality to it. "Don't take my child from me." I had no desire to hang around and find out what she meant. I sprinted from the living room to the hallway, praying the front door would hold. I hauled my body up the rotting stairs, two at a time. Plunging into the darkness, I prepared for the door to fly from its hinges. The thing for which I did not prepare was to suddenly find myself standing on a well-lit, refurbished landing. The Hawthorne house had morphed into a lavish home. From the top of the staircase, I turned to face the downstairs hallway. The banging on the front door had ceased, and it opened to reveal the mother. She was an ordinary person, not a frightening apparition. I realized I had wandered through a portal in time. I would say my initial guess had been accurate. It seemed to be a snapshot of the 1940s. "Jonathan, tell Bert that dinner will be ready in half an hour," the mother shouted. "He's not in here, Sarah," Jonathan replied. The father's ghost startled me, though the couple seemed much jollier in this memory. He strolled straight through my body and walked down the stairs. "Well, I told the boy that he could only play until I finished taking down the laundry," Sarah huffed. "He was with the Dalton boys across the road," Jonathan said, now striding across the downstairs hallway. "I shall fetch him." The ghosts of the parents evaporated, and the house transported to a different moment in time. There was crying from a room farther down the landing. As I walked towards it, I noticed more frames on the walls. They were less macabre than the portrait I'd seen in the living room. There were 3 paintings of the individual Hawthorne family members. Seeing an ajar door on the left side of the landing, I peered through the slight opening. The sobbing mother was sitting at her dressing table, which faced away from the doorway. I could only see the back of her body. The father was holding her shoulders and futilely striving to console her. "I cannot live without him, Jonathan," she wailed. "A mother cannot live without her baby." "You shan't have to do that," Jonathan promised. "I have found a way to return his soul to us. Francis acquired some books. There are rituals that can help. But they come with a price, so any price," Sarah coldly interrupted. "And what of the boys who murdered our child?" Jonathan asked. "Death would be too merciful," she said. "I agree. From my readings, I've learned ways in which we could make them suffer. If we could transform this house into unhallowed ground, we could ensnare their souls and eternally trap them here. They would become part of the building's woodwork. We would have to build an 11th shrine on the eve of the new year. There might be consequences for others who step foot on this land, but do it," Sarah icily whispered. The world washed away again. I saw brief flashes of the parents in their bedroom. They were drawing bloody patterns on the walls. I heard sourceless screams, cries of anguish from who I only assume must have been the children who murdered Bert. The jigsaw pieces were sliding together. The souls of Bert's killers were embedded in the Hawthorne house. Sarah and Jonathan had succeeded, but had they also managed to resurrect their child? I shuddered, remembering the ghastly painting of a withering Bert in the living room. Something told me that a happily ever after hadn't been on the cards for the fractured family. The lights extinguished. The fresh decor aged in seconds, returning the Hawthorne house to the present. Well, I suppose I wasn't really experiencing any sort of time period. Everything faded away except for one thing, one person, the mother. She was still sitting at her dressing table, facing away from the doorway. Her vanity mirror was cracked and coated in filth. I couldn't see her reflection. Her clothes were dusty and tattered. Her once beautiful blonde hair was withered, and she was stroking it with a hairbrush. Her strokes were so vicious that clumps of hair were ripping from her head. No fucking way. I'm not going in there. I attempted to cautiously back away from the door, but floorboards betrayed me. They moaned beneath my weight. Fuck. The hairbrushing abruptly stopped. The old rickety vanity stool squeaked as the mother adjusted herself. I expected her to twist her entire body around to face me, but she didn't. Instead, she simply twisted her head. She twisted beyond breaking point. She twisted her head 180 degrees. What was even ghastlier, however, was the face which gazed upon me. It was decomposing. Maggots swam through the cavities in the mother's flesh. Her lipless mouth opened, revealing rotten teeth. She did not smile as she had in the painting. "Where is my son?" her half-human voice cried. To protect itself, my haunted brain had detached from reality. So, when the bedroom door slammed shut, I was relieved and petrified in equal measure. I was relieved to be free of the mother's ghoulish gaze, but I was petrified of what I would face next. Remembering why I had come to the Hawthorne house, I resolved to keep searching for Pippa and the boys. I didn't know what kind of demonic spectre I'd just seen in the bedroom, and I didn't want to know. Standing in the upstairs hallway, desperately trying to catch my breath, I became aware of a squelching sound. I cast my phone torch onto the wall behind me. A black liquid of unknown composition had scrawled 3 direful words. "Father is home." Moving my torch onto the paintings, I saw Bert and Sarah in their portraits. The third painting, on the other hand, was merely a blank canvas. Jonathan had left his portrait. I heard the front door open and slam shut. Loud footsteps moved with immense speed and purpose, clunking up the stairs. Crying in utterly primal fear, I ran towards the far end of the landing. I opened the final door on the left, hearing floorboards groan beneath the weight of some hulking, monstrous entity. For a split second, before I stepped through the open doorway, I caught a glimpse of something in the glow of my phone light. The father was far taller and wider than he had appeared in the flashbacks. His gargantuan, ghostly form could barely squeeze through the upstairs corridor. His decomposing face was much like that of his wife, but his eyes were bloody spheres in his sockets. I slammed the door behind me and locked it. There was a cacophony of fist-pounding on the door. The father said nothing. His fury spoke far louder than words. I found myself in a second bedroom, Bert's bedroom. Heart still not slowing, the frights did not cease. "Jake," a disembodied girl's voice hissed. I froze. "It's Pippa," she continued. "We're in the hideaway. We've been here for months." "Where's the hideaway?" I asked. The banging on the bedroom door finally quietened. Pippa whispered again. "Behind the wardrobe," she said. "Hurry, I think they heard me." I found the wardrobe on the left-hand wall and started to push it to the side. It was surprisingly light. Once it was a few feet to the right, a small opening was revealed in the wall behind it. I couldn't see anything inside the darkened doorway, but I had to press forwards. I used my phone to light the way, and I found myself ascending a small set of stairs. Of course, the attic with the oval window. I tentatively clambered up the staircase, keeping my eyes and ears keenly peeled for anything untoward. When I reached the top, I stretched my hand towards the door handle before me, creaking. An icy breath skirted across my left ear. Something was standing on the step behind me. "They murdered him," a voice groaned. I didn't need to turn my head. I knew it was the mother. Quivering, I lightly pressed the standby button to switch off the screen. On the dark, glassy surface of my phone, I saw the walking corpse of the half-decayed mother, standing just behind me. Her gaunt face was illuminated by my torchlight. I screamed in terror, but I was quickly silenced by a gnarled, bony hand that clasped over my mouth. That only made me scream louder. I shook the creature off me, whirled around, and she was gone. Too frightened to spend another minute in this house of nightmares, I proceeded to repeatedly slam my shoulder into the attic door. Finally, it gave way. I cast my phone light into the attic, expecting to be met with emptiness, but I turned to the right to find myself looking upon 4 malnourished children who were shivering beneath the oval window. The world outside remained an endless void, but that was besides the point. I'd done it. I'd found the girl who had been trapping me in the loop for thousands of years. It hadn't been a fruitless endeavour. The children were crying incessantly. "I'm so sorry," Pippa said. "I was just so scared. Can you help us to leave this place?" "We didn't mean to do it," one of the boys whimpered. "The voices made us lock her in here," another boy added. The third boy simply nodded, seemingly too traumatized to speak. "Okay," I eventually managed to say. "Do any of you know something that could help us to escape?" Their eyes widened. "You don't know how to free us?" one of the boys shakily asked. I didn't respond. My mind was whirring. I thought about everything Harold had told me. Then I realized I didn't need his help. I needed the help of the people who had created the shrine. "Sarah!" I screamed. "Jonathan!" "What are you doing?" Pippa asked, horrified. "We need to get away from them." Before I could reply, the wall at the far end of the attic started to ripple. Like swimmers coming to the surface of a pool, the dreadful mother and father seeped through the torn wallpaper. The children screeched, but I stood my ground, keeping the torchlight on the horrible abominations that were striding towards us. "Is your son buried in the front garden?" I asked. No reply. The emotionless demons looked upon me with awful eyes. "If you create a bridge back to the real world, I could return him to you," I said. "That's what you want, isn't it?" The mother started to walk towards me, and I trembled in immobilizing terror. "He should be here with us," she wheezed. "Open the bridge," I repeated. "You can't leave the house, can you? I can return his bones to you. I can give you peace. But you must return all of us to our rightful places, on our rightful timelines." The ghouls stared for a long time. The only sound in that haunted room was the blubbering of the 4 children who were hiding behind me. I received my answer in the form of light pouring into the room. Not light from my phone, light from the oval window. I and the children turned to face the real world. Fireworks filled the sky. As we watched with teary eyes, the children dissipated. The outside world, in turn, rapidly changed. The sun rose and set thousands of times in the matter of seconds. Years were passing. When the earth eventually slowed, I knew it was 2022 again. "Return our son," the father wheezed. When I turned to face them, the terrifying entities were gone. I sprinted down the stairs from the attic, bounded across Bert's bedroom, flung my panicked body along the hallway and started to sprint down the main staircase. Gliding across the hallway towards the open door, I prepared to taste freedom. Scorching agony. Horrified, I found myself engulfed in darkness, before being thrown onto the floor of the hallway. I bellowed in pain, feeling a searing sensation across my skin. No, I whined in horror. The glassy-eyed man. He was standing on the front porch, obstructing what seemed to be the only exit from this house of hellish tricks. He was little more than a shadow, filling the doorway with his black form and white pinpricks. "I fixed it," I yelled. "The loop is over." No response from the inhuman entity. No movement. I checked the time on my phone. 11:02 p.m. "It's after 11 o'clock and I've not reset," I explained exasperatedly. "The loop is over." After an eternal moment, the shadow faded into the blackness. The glassy pinpricks merged with the night sky, joining a canopy of twinkling stars. My strained heart finally loosened. Gingerly, I attempted to leave the house. I took a step onto the porch. Nothing stopped me. I hurried into the front yard and tore at the grass with my bare hands. Dirt under my half-broken nails, I quickly dug my way to the cluster of bones that the Hawthorne parents had buried. Why did they not keep the bones in the house? Did they ever manage to resurrect their son? Why were their souls trapped in the 11 shrine with their son's murderers? So many unanswered questions. I delicately and respectfully placed the pile of bones inside the main hallway, quickly exiting the Hawthorne house. As I tiptoed backwards, keeping my eye on the open front door, I saw a bony hand stretch across the wooden floor and drag Bert's remnants out of view. As I passed through the gate, the door to the Hawthorne house swung shut. That was 15 minutes ago, and I hope, beyond all hope, to never reopen that terrible chapter of my life. At this very moment, I find myself sitting on the curb, typing my update, and staring vacantly at swarms of partygoers. They're blissfully unaware of the horrors lurking in the abhorrent building just behind me. 11:20 p.m. I've never lived beyond 11 p.m. on December 31st, 2022. That must be a promising sign. I'm free, surely. At 11 p.m. I didn't wake up in 1999. Pippa must have released me. But has the Hawthorne house released me? Has the glassy-eyed man released me? I suppose I'll never have a definite answer. I'll always wince in terror at the sight of cavernous crevices. I'll always look for those white eyes. I cannot conquer the unknown, but that's not my battle. After thousands of torturous years, I would simply settle for seeing January 1st, 2023. At midnight, let's hope I managed to post a comment. I can't believe it. 2023. I scurried home and tightly embraced each of my family members. "I wanted to kiss you. It's 2 minutes past midnight," my wife said, scowling. "It took you a long time to get here." She has no idea.